Beneath the surface of the wars we think we know, there are corridors of silence carved into history, sealed vaults, erased files, and whispers buried under rubble. The maps show victories and defeats, but between those lines lie shadows where men carried secrets too dangerous for daylight. What was hidden was not only machinery or weapons, but choices that reshaped nations and stained consciences, leaving behind echoes no archive ever wanted to admit existed. On the night of April 10, 1945, just 3 weeks before Adolf Hitler's suicide in Berlin, an armored convoy left the outskirts of Magdeburg under heavy fog. The manifest identified the movement as part of Operation Eclipse, an innocuous codename supposedly related to troop withdrawal. Yet the convoy was unlike any ordinary German retreat column. The 10 trucks were escorted by Waffen-SS troops from the 38th SS Grenadier Division, Nibelungen. Not frontline soldiers, but men handpicked for loyalty. Their destination, according to fragmentary radio intercepts, was a series of tunnels in the Harz Mountains near Nordhausen, a region already saturated with secrecy due to the nearby Mittelwerk Phi 2 assembly facility. American intelligence, particularly officers attached to the 3rd Armored Division, picked up chatter about this unusual movement. Decrypted Enigma messages suggested special cargo, though the term was left deliberately vague. The Allies assumed gold, looted art, or high-ranking officers attempting to flee. Yet Soviet patrols moving westward toward Thuringia reported similar sightings, convoys disappearing into the mountains, followed by sporadic firefights, then silence. Later testimony suggests the Soviets were aware of something more dangerous than treasure was being concealed. Nordhausen itself was already notorious. Beneath the Kohnstein mountain lay the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp and the Mittelwerk tunnels, where thousands of slave laborers constructed V-2 rockets in inhumane conditions. American forces liberated the site on April 11th, finding corpses stacked in heaps and prisoners too weak to stand. Yet in the reports filed by Colonel James W. Forsyth, commanding officer of the 104th Infantry Division, there is a passing mention of sealed sublevels, off-limits to regular troops. Engineers dynamited entrances to prevent collapse, but, curiously, no full mapping was ever completed. Soviet archives reveal another layer. In May 1945, Red Army units entered the Harz region from the east, attempting to secure technology before the Americans did. One Soviet reconnaissance detachment, identified in a KGB after-action report as elements of the 89th Rifle Division, stumbled upon a burned-out convoy near Ilfeld. Several trucks had exploded, leaving only charred steel frames. Yet 2 intact vehicles remained, their interiors stripped bare. What drew attention was not what remained, but what was missing. The lead vehicle's floor had been lined with heavy lead sheeting, a strange measure unless the cargo required shielding. 2 soldiers reportedly suffered unexplained radiation-like burns after prolonged contact with debris, though official Soviet documentation described it only as severe dermatitis from chemical exposure. Witness testimony decades later adds to the mystery. Hans Bauer, a Wehrmacht mechanic captured in the Harz and interrogated by US intelligence, recalled being ordered to maintain trucks carrying sealed cylinders, roughly the size of fuel drums. He claimed to have overheard SS officers refer to them as Sonnenradgerät, sunwheel devices. Bauer's testimony was dismissed as unreliable, yet his description matched post-war rumors of nuclear or radiological experiments carried out in the dying days of the Reich. The Americans, too, seemed unsettled. Declassified OSS cables between London and Washington in July 1945 reference a lost convoy, probable atomic connection. General Leslie Groves, head of the Manhattan Project, personally requested updates. His handwriting appears in the margin of one file. If Russians found it first, implications severe. The matter vanished from American records after that note, as though deliberately erased. The Soviets, for their part, sealed their findings under Special Folder 1248, reserved for material too sensitive for circulation even within the military. Files declassified in the 1990s revealed only fragments, photographs of burned-out vehicles, medical reports of soldiers with skin lesions, and an order signed by Lavrenti Beria, Stalin's security chief, demanding the materials be transported to Moscow. Yet no subsequent reference exists, suggesting the evidence was either destroyed or incorporated into post-war atomic programs under total secrecy. By 1946, Allied investigators revisiting the Harz tunnels found entire sections collapsed or deliberately demolished. British Royal Engineers noted signs of controlled charges rather than natural cave-ins. A surviving Dora prisoner testified that prisoners had been forced to dig a new series of chambers deeper within the mountain, far beyond the rocket factory. They said it was for a weapon greater than the V2, he told an American interrogator. His statement was filed away, never pursued. What became of Operation Eclipse remains unresolved. The most credible hypothesis among military historians is that the convoy was transporting components related to Germany's nuclear research. Documents recovered from Haigerloch, where German physicists had hidden their experimental uranium reactor, proved the Reich had stockpiled enriched uranium oxide. How much of it remained unaccounted for in April 1945 is still debated. If Eclipse carried such material, the secrecy surrounding its disappearance becomes understandable. Others argue the convoy held advanced propulsion systems. Plans for the America bomber, capable of reaching US soil, were circulating within the Luftwaffe High Command. A propulsion breakthrough, even an incomplete prototype, would have been a prize worth hiding from advancing allies. The lead-line trucks suggest radioactive material, but no surviving physical evidence corroborates this. Conspiracy researchers in the 1960s claimed US intelligence sanitized the Nordhausen files as part of Operation Paperclip, ensuring no trace of Eclipse entered public consciousness. Yet even among paperclip documents, no direct mention has surfaced. A chilling footnote lies in testimony from a Soviet engineer, Mikhail Karpov, who defected in 1957. Karpov claimed he had seen German cylinders stored in a Kurchatov Institute basement in Moscow. He was told never to ask questions, only to monitor radiation levels. His description, smooth steel drums with faint eagle markings, matched Hans Bauer's account from 1945. The Eclipse convoy, last seen heading into the Harz Mountains under a cloak of fog, left behind nothing but scorched trucks, sealed tunnels, and dead men. Whether it carried uranium, experimental engines, or something more sinister will likely never be proven. Both Washington and Moscow buried the evidence beneath layers of bureaucracy and silence. Yet the fragments that remain, handwritten notes, burned photographs, a mechanic's whispered memory, continue to suggest that in the dying days of the Reich, something far more dangerous than treasure was hidden, and perhaps lost forever, in the dark heart of Germany's mountains. On the night of September 17, 1944, a coded transmission reached the London headquarters of the Office of Strategic Services. It referenced a German physicist, Dr. Emil Hartmann, a man previously unknown to Allied scientific intelligence. Hartmann was rumored to be in possession of sketches for what OSS analysts described as a transportable fissile core assembly, a device smaller than anything the Manhattan Project had yet achieved. The intercept, traced to Prague, was considered so urgent that OSS operatives were ordered to execute a rapid extraction, codenamed Project Starlight. The Starlight team was composed of 5 men drawn from the OSS Czech section, supported by local resistance contacts. According to fragments of Hart's OSS Field Report 3229, the operatives parachuted into the outskirts of Prague on September 20th. Their orders: locate Hartmann, secure his documents, and exfiltrate him through partisan-controlled corridors toward Allied lines. The urgency stemmed from the belief that Hartmann was about to be transferred deeper into Germany, beyond Allied reach. One marginal note in the surviving documents reads, "If this man boards a train, recovery unlikely." By September 24th, the team had identified Hartmann moving under heavy SS escort. Witnesses later confirmed that he had been taken to Prague's Wilson Station, where a midnight train was assembled. Several resistance fighters claimed the convoy consisted of 2 passenger cars and 3 heavily guarded freight cars. The train, they said, bore insignia of the SS Totenkopf division, unusual for transport duty inside the protectorate. At least 1 freight car was said to be outfitted with armored plating. From this point, the trail becomes fractured. The OSS team never filed another complete report. Field Report 3229 ends abruptly with the notation: subject being loaded. Train departs Thuringia bound. Pursuit impossible. What exactly occurred during the attempted interception has been lost, though rumors circulated that gunfire erupted on the station's eastern platforms. No confirmation has ever surfaced. By dawn, the train was gone, heading west under sealed orders. In the immediate aftermath, several curious developments occurred. First, the Prague Underground Telegraph Network, used by resistance fighters to relay messages to London, went silent for 48 hours. When communication resumed, operators reported that 3 Americans had disappeared and 2 resistance men had been executed. One chilling message referenced a briefcase found near the tracks, containing fragments of diagrams and handwritten notes. It was sent to London but never surfaced in declassified OSS archives. Second, railway records for that night were later discovered to have been altered. Official Reichsbahn ledgers indicate no departures from Wilson Station at midnight, September 24th. Yet at least 3 eyewitnesses independently testified after the war that they saw a heavily armed train leave Prague under blackout conditions, guarded by SS men who refused to answer questions. One Czech station worker, Karol Dvorak, told US interrogators in 1946, "They ordered us into the tunnel. We were not to look. But I heard the wagons, heavy, creaking, not passengers, something. Inside, something that made the whole train feel heavier than steel." The trail of the lost train has haunted intelligence circles ever since. American records show that in October 1945, 1 year after the supposed mission, General Groves of the Manhattan Project personally requested files relating to Field. Report 3229 from OSS archives, his assistant noted in the margins, "Files incomplete, originals missing." By then, OSS had already been dissolved and replaced by the CIA, making it difficult to trace accountability. Soviet documents, declassified decades later, provide tantalizing fragments. A report dated November 1944 from the NKGB precursor to the KGB references a German train carrying unusual cargo through Bohemia toward Thuringia. Soviet agents apparently attempted to intercept it near Dresden but failed. Curiously, the same report noted contact with Allied operatives unsuccessful, suggesting Moscow had been aware of the OSS mission and perhaps monitoring its progress. The NKGB officer's conclusion was blunt: the Americans lost their asset, Germans retained control, cargo location unknown. What then became of Dr. Emil Hartmann? No record of his existence survives in post-war Allied or German archives. Unlike Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, or Kurt Diebner, Hartmann's name vanishes into thin air. The possibility remains that he was a fabrication, an invention of disinformation, deliberately fed to the Allies. Yet the persistence of the train's legend, corroborated by resistance witnesses and Soviet files, suggests something tangible was being transported. If not Hartmann himself, then his research. Speculation has focused on Thuringia because the train's supposed destination aligns with known sites of late-war weapons research. Near Ohrdruf, not far from the Buchenwald camp, rumors circulated of experimental reactors and underground laboratories. US troops entering the region in April 1945 reported massive tunnel complexes and half-completed facilities. Many were dynamited by retreating Germans, others sealed by Allied engineers. No definitive link has ever been drawn to the Prague train, but circumstantial evidence points to the region as the final stop. One of the most disturbing details comes from a debriefing of Czech partisan Josef Marek in 1947. Marek claimed to have been part of the attempted ambush at Wilson Station. He survived only because he was arrested and transferred to Terezin, escaping liberation by mere days. In his testimony, he described seeing Hartmann on the platform. He was thin, pale, carrying a satchel. The SS treated him like a treasure. They shouted at him not to look up. When he stumbled, they nearly shot him, then lifted him into the carriage as if he were more valuable alive than dead. If Marek's account is true, then Hartmann did exist, and the Allies lost him on that night. Yet the most haunting element lies in the aftermath. When OSS personnel reviewed Prague in May 1945, they located a rail siding near the station where they discovered a derailed freight wagon. Its steel sides blackened. Inside lay only twisted straps and scorched fragments of paper. One investigator noted faint markings in German. Urine probe 14. Uranium sample 14. The evidence was quietly removed, never entered into official reports. Whether the train carried Hartmann nuclear samples or a decoy meant to mislead the Allies remains uncertain. What is known is that 5 OSS operatives vanished into the night of September 24, 1944, their mission ending without explanation. Their names do not appear on casualty lists, nor were their bodies recovered. They remain listed only in internal OSS documents as unresolved. The fragments of Field Report 3229 are all that remain. A few typed pages, scattered eyewitness testimony, and a blood-stained briefcase retrieved from a railway embankment. The rest is silence, buried beneath the bureaucratic rubble of 2 collapsing empires. The lost train of Prague rolls on in rumour and shadow, a midnight ghost that never arrived at its station and never returned. In late November 1950, as United Nations forces advanced deep into North Korea during the Korean War, elements of the US 1st Cavalry Division uncovered an anomaly. Amidst the rubble of a bombed-out Japanese industrial complex outside Pyongyang, engineers conducting demolition surveys stumbled upon a steel hatch concealed beneath layers of collapsed masonry. Initial assessments suggested the structure predated the Korean conflict, likely a remnant of Japan's wartime occupation. What the soldiers found inside has never been fully explained, though fragments of testimony and declassified memoranda point towards something far older, something tied directly to the closing days of the Second World War. The hatch opened into a descending stairwell lined with reinforced concrete, a feature atypical for a factory cellar. At the bottom, the men encountered a heavy blast door welded shut, bearing stenciled Japanese kanji for restricted and imperial property. After cutting through the steel, they entered a chamber measuring roughly 20 meters square. Inside were wooden crates stacked in precise formation, each marked not with Japanese script but with faded German eagles and swastikas. The incongruity stunned the unit's commanding officer, Captain Harold J. Atwood, who immediately ordered the site sealed and sent word up the chain of command. According to a partially declassified US Army G2 intelligence report dated December 3, 1950, Atwood's men catalogued several crates before higher authority intervened. Inside were documents written in German, blueprints of complex machinery, handwritten laboratory notes, and bound autopsy reports labeled Versuchsobjekt, test subjects. One crate contained glass vials filled with cloudy liquids sealed with wax. Another held metallic components resembling miniature turbines, far too advanced for Japanese wartime production standards. The presence of swastika insignia strongly suggested transfer from the Reich to Japanese custody, raising the possibility of a joint Axis weapons program concealed at the war's end. The discovery was short-lived. Within 48 hours, the vault was placed under guard by Counterintelligence Corps, CIC personnel. Soldiers from Atwood's platoon were reassigned to scattered units, effectively silenced. Captain Atwood himself was rotated to rear command in Tokyo, his name absent from subsequent mission rosters. Surviving veterans later claimed that anyone who attempted to discuss the vault was threatened with court-martial under accusations of disclosure of classified information. declassified fragments hint at what happened next. An internal memorandum from the CIA's Scientific Intelligence Division, dated January 1951, references material recovered near Pyongyang of European origin, probable 1945 transfer. The file names the code name Project Silver Ash, under which the crates were apparently recatalogued and shipped to Yokohama, then onward to the United States. The same document notes: material sensitive, must not enter UN channels, handle under existing paperclip protocols. Paperclip, of course, was the program used to smuggle German scientists into the US after the war, suggesting whatever was found in Pyongyang was considered part of the same prize. Eyewitness recollections provide disturbing additional detail. Sergeant William Cooper, interviewed in 1972 by a veterans historian, described one crate they opened before being pulled away. Inside were photographs of emaciated figures strapped to tables, their torsos cut open. Accompanying the images were pages of notes written in both German and Japanese. Cooper recalled the heading Einheit 731B scrawled in ink across the top of one dossier, a chilling hybrid reference to Germany's SS medical units and Japan's notorious Unit 731. Cooper insisted the files described experiments involving chemical agents combined with neutron emissions, terminology he did not understand at the time. He was warned never to speak of it again. Soviet intelligence had its own interest. In 1952, a KGB report referencing American seizure of German-Japanese archive in Korea surfaced in Moscow's Far East Command. The report accused Washington of deliberately concealing evidence of Japanese war crimes in exchange for scientific data. The Soviets claimed they had attempted to intercept the convoy transporting the crates, but arrived too late. The report concludes, the Americans possess materials from Dora Mittelwerk and Harbin laboratories combined. The scale of this knowledge could alter future balance. The most enduring mystery concerns the fate of the materials. A heavily redacted CIA file from 1967 references Silver Ash Box 12, described as containing turbine array segments with anomalous alloy composition. Metallurgists reportedly identified tungsten vanadium linings impossible to produce with 1940s technology. Another file, Box 7, contained autopsy logs cross-referenced with names of known Japanese doctors from Unit 731, but with annotations in German script attributed to SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Helmut Voss, previously thought to have died in Minneapolis, Berlin, in 1945. No mention of these files ever reached international tribunals. By the 1980s, rumors of silver ash circulated among intelligence researchers. Some suggested the vault represented the final handover of Nazi technology to Japan in 1945, evacuated eastward as Germany collapsed. With shipping routes disrupted, such cargo could only have traveled aboard submarines, echoing accounts of German U-boats surrendering in Japanese waters late in the war. Others speculated the material constituted fragments of an unfinished radiological weapon project, combining the Reich's experimental nuclear research with Japan's biological warfare expertise. Without the crates themselves, speculation remains all that is possible. Perhaps the most chilling testimony came from Private First Class Leonard Jenkins, who in a 1994 oral history project recalled the atmosphere inside the vault. It smelled like ammonia and metal, not like any basement or bunker I'd been in before. The crates weren't just dumped there, they were organized like someone planned to come back. The one we cracked open had drawings of people standing near a machine that looked like a big wheel with rods coming out. The note said something about exposure times. I couldn't read the German, but the pictures showed burns, not bombs, burns. Jenkins claimed that after speaking to a journalist in the 1970s, he received an untraceable phone call warning him to leave Korea in the ground. Today, the original Pyongyang site is inaccessible, buried beneath decades of urban reconstruction. The hatch and stairwell are gone, lost under asphalt and concrete. What remains are scattered files, redacted memoranda, fragments of testimony, and a handful of veterans' accounts. The truth of what American soldiers found in that vault is unlikely to ever surface in full. Whether it was remnants of Nazi weapons research, a collaborative Japanese atrocity program, or a hybrid of both, the evidence was systematically erased, folded into programs that never appeared in congressional hearings. The war in Korea was supposed to be a fight against communism, not a continuation of hidden battles from the last global conflict. Yet in that ruined Japanese complex near Pyongyang, the ghosts of the Second World War emerged, briefly exposed by chance, only to be buried again. This time, not by bombs, but by silence. What passed through the hatch in December 1950 was not merely crates of documents and machines, but a darker inheritance of two empires that had already fallen, carried forward into the Cold War's shadows under the codename Silver Ash. On March 12, 1952, a team from Britain's Royal Air Force Technical Intelligence Division quietly entered the Bavarian countryside, their objective buried under layers of secrecy. A farmer near Oberammergau had reported fragments of an aircraft, uncovered during flooding of a hillside pasture. The fragments, when retrieved by German police, bore markings from Messerschmitt's experimental facility at Oberammergau, home of the abandoned P-1101 project, a jet fighter intended to rival the Allied F-86 Sabre. Yet when engineers examined the wreckage, they found features that no surviving Luftwaffe documentation had ever mentioned. The pieces included control vanes lined with tungsten, and what appeared to be a fuel system calibrated for something other than kerosene. One RAF memorandum from April 1952 notes: component configuration inconsistent with contemporary metallurgy, suggests higher heat tolerance than current Rolls-Royce capacity. The possibility that German engineers had been working toward propulsion systems decades ahead of their time alarmed London. If the Soviets were to acquire such technology, the balance of air power in the Cold War could shift overnight. Thus was born Operation Glass Curtain, the codename for a covert British effort to transport the wreckage to London for further study. The recovered crates were loaded onto 3 trucks, escorted by members of the Intelligence Corps and civilian scientists under military guard. The convoy's route was to pass through Austria, cross into Italy, and from there be shipped by sea to Portsmouth. All official paperwork described the shipment as meteorological instruments. Few beyond a handful of senior Air Ministry officers knew its true nature. According to declassified British cabinet papers, Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself initialed the decision to proceed. The convoy departed Bavaria on May 2, 1952. It never reached its destination intact. Near Villach, in southern Austria, the column was ambushed on a mountain road by a group armed with surplus Soviet weaponry. Survivors later testified that the attackers used PPSH-41 submachine guns and captured German Panzerfausts, weaponry that could only have been supplied by Eastern Bloc arsenals. The attackers demonstrated military discipline far beyond that of ordinary bandits. 2 trucks were destroyed, their cargo lost in the inferno. The third, carrying the most intact fuselage fragments, broke through the roadblock and eventually reached Trieste, yet when it was unloaded, the crates were empty. British reports filed afterward described the incident as an act of armed robbery by unknown hostile elements. Yet off-record testimony paints a darker picture. One RAF sergeant, interviewed privately in 1975, insisted that the convoy was betrayed from within. He recalled seeing one of the Austrian liaison officers radioing coordinates hours before the Yale ambush, then disappearing during the attack. The sergeant claimed that when the surviving crates arrived in London, the Air Ministry expected the advanced turbine blades to be inside. Instead, they contained only sandbags. The most sensitive cargo had vanished en route. MI6 launched an investigation under the internal codename Project Fenrir. Declassified fragments suggest agents quickly traced the missing cargo to Vienna, then into Czechoslovakia. Beyond that, the trail went cold. Soviet archives released in the 1990s contain a tantalizing entry, a May 1952 memorandum from KGB officer Ivan Serov to Moscow headquarters, describing receipt of German aviation materials, origin Bavaria. The memorandum adds, items Exhibit properties of unusual alloys. Immediate transfer to Moscow Institute required. This strongly suggests the Soviets had not only intercepted the convoy, but successfully smuggled the wreckage into their own experimental aircraft program. Besides, implications were immense. The MiG-19, first flown in 1953, introduced swept-wing technology that some Western analysts argued bore striking resemblance to the theoretical design of the Messerschmitt P-101. While coincidence cannot be ruled out, the timing is suspicious. One Air Ministry scientist wrote in a private diary, "The Russians leapfrogged forward too quickly. I believe they had help from Bavaria via Villach." Rumors circulated in intelligence circles that the fragments were not simply advanced jet designs, but prototypes for variable geometry wings, a concept decades ahead of its time. The P-101 had been designed with an adjustable sweep angle, though never perfected. British engineers examining the wreckage before the ambush noted evidence of hinge assemblies far more robust than documented. If perfected, such technology could have revolutionized supersonic flight. To this day, no surviving physical samples confirm these observations. Only blurred photographs and hurried sketches from the engineers who briefly examined the debris remain. What unsettled investigators most was the metallurgy. The surviving reports describe alloys resistant to temperatures exceeding 1500 degrees Celsius, a threshold only achieved in Western labs much later. How German engineers obtained such materials during wartime shortages is unknown. Some historians suggest experimental smelting using forced labor deep inside the Harz Mountains, where V-2 rockets were produced. Others believe the alloys were manufactured in small quantities, never scaled to production. Regardless, their presence in Bavaria in 1952 remains unexplained. The disappearance of the wreckage was officially classified until 1989. When files were finally released, they were heavily redacted with entire pages missing. Even the name glass curtain was blacked out in multiple instances. Survivors of the ambush were never publicly acknowledged, their service omitted from honors lists. One officer, Flight Lieutenant Peter Mallory, attempted to publish his memoir in 1968, describing the convoy and its destruction. He was served with an injunction under the Official Secrets Act, his manuscript confiscated. He died in 1971, his story silenced. A single surviving photograph, held in the RAF Museum archives but not on public display, shows the wreckage prior to transport. It depicts a fuselage section unlike any known Messerschmitt model, its curvature sleek, almost modern. A handwritten annotation reads, P1101 derivative, glass curtain specimen, 1952. The photograph remains classified to this day, released only in blurred reproductions. The ambush at Villach remains unsolved. Austrian police at the time blamed roving bandits. MI6 blamed Soviet infiltration. Some survivors whispered it was neither, that the Americans themselves intervened to seize the technology, unwilling to share advanced German designs with Britain. A small minority even suggested the wreckage was never of German origin at all, but something else hidden under the Reich's facilities, disguised with Nazi markings to conceal its provenance. Such theories, though, rest on speculation. What is certain is that in May 1952, Britain lost its most valuable post-war intelligence prize on a remote Austrian mountain road. Whether by Soviet ambush, betrayal, or shadow operations by allies, the cargo vanished, its contents never seen again. The Royal Air Force entered the jet age without the advantage it might have gained, while Soviet designs accelerated in sophistication. For those who knew of Glass Curtain, the conclusion was bitterly simple. The Cold War had claimed one of its first silent victories, not in the skies, but on a dark alpine road where history was stolen at gunpoint and erased in fire. In July 1944, following the bloody battle for the Vercors Plateau in southeastern France, the German garrison abandoned its alpine stronghold in apparent haste. Official French accounts declared the camp destroyed by resistance attacks. yet photographs, taken by liberating units, show something far more unsettling. Beyond the charred barracks and wrecked trucks, large steel doors were visible cut into the mountainside. Thick power cables ran into the rock face, suggesting an installation far larger than a temporary outpost. Locals swore the Germans had constructed underground hangars beneath Mont Aiguille itself. Official records, however, dismissed the claims as rumor. After the war, the French army launched an investigation into what was known as Camp Vercors, hoping to catalogue German activity in the region. The inquiry stalled almost immediately. Initial engineering surveys described intact galleries descending into mountain strata, reinforced with steel beams. But before comprehensive mapping could be completed, the site was dynamited by order of the Ministry of Defense. Only one line survives in the final report. No further action required. Area rendered inaccessible. The abrupt closure raised suspicions among resistance veterans who had fought in the plateau and witnessed German movements firsthand. Eyewitnesses tell a different story. Pierre Morel, a resistance fighter from Grenoble, testified in 1946 that convoys of German trucks routinely entered the mountain during 1943-44. They were not supply trucks, he insisted in his statement to local authorities. They carried crates, heavy crates. The guards were not Wehrmacht. They were SS engineers, men with strange uniforms and red piping. Morel further claimed that even after the plateau was retaken, he heard engines roaring within the mountain at night. They said the Germans were gone, he told a journalist in 1962, but the mountain still shook as if aircraft were taking off beneath the ground. Theories multiplied. Some believed Camp Vercors was tied to the Luftwaffe's secret America bomber program. Others argued it was linked to the Reich's rumored underground research network, similar to Mittelwerk in the Harz Mountains. Whatever its purpose, the site clearly had infrastructure far exceeding a mountain garrison. Surviving aerial photographs show ventilation shafts camouflaged by foliage and railway spurs terminating near the cliff face, features absent from official blueprints of the region. The most disturbing fragments, however, come from Allied files. A US SHAF intelligence bulletin dated September 1944 briefly mentions subterranean workshops, Vercors Plateau. The notation is underlined in red, with a handwritten stamp across the page. Property of SHAF. Do not duplicate. No further reference appears in American archives. French requests for cooperation on the matter were quietly ignored. When French engineers attempted to re-enter the tunnels in late 1945, they were barred by US military police still stationed in the area. Within weeks, the Americans withdrew, but not before a convoy of trucks was observed leaving the site. Under heavy guard. By 1947, Camp Vercors had vanished from public discourse. The official French army history of the liberation does not mention the underground hangars at all. Veterans who spoke publicly were accused of exaggeration, yet fragments of testimony persisted. In 1953, an anonymous engineer writing in Revue Militaire Française hinted that certain wartime excavations in the Alps contained machinery beyond their time. The article was swiftly pulled, and the author's identity remains unknown. Locals in the Drôme region whispered that the Americans had carted away equipment before the French could see it, machines so large they required disassembly to fit onto trucks. Soviet intelligence files released in 1991 provide further pieces. A GRU summary, dated November 1944, noted Anglo-American seizure of German apparatus, Vercors sector. The summary claimed the machinery was later shipped from Marseille to an undisclosed port in the United States. The Soviet analysts speculated the devices were linked to power generation, possibly intended for experimental propulsion. Their language is vague, but one chilling phrase stands out. Evidence of test stands for vertical ascension vehicles. If accurate, this would place Camp Vercors among the earliest alleged sites of vertical flight experimentation, predating Western rocketry advances by decades. Local memory has not forgotten. Farmers in the Vercors still recount strange lights in the skies during the occupation. Silent, glowing objects that rose vertically above the mountains before vanishing into clouds. Official histories dismiss such tales as misidentified Allied bombers or German flares. Yet when cross-referenced with Luftwaffe flight logs, there are no records of aircraft operating in that corridor on the nights reported. For villagers who lived through the occupation, the memory of machines that climbed the night has never faded. By the late 20th century, researchers attempting to locate the buried hangars were confronted with dynamited rockfalls and restricted zones. The French army maintains that demolitions in 1946 permanently sealed all entrances. Yet satellite imagery from the 1990s revealed unnatural geometric scars on the mountainside, consistent with collapsed tunnels. Amateur spelunkers who attempted to access the area reported being intercepted by gendarmes, instructed that the land was a protected military zone. No public explanation was given. One surviving French document, recovered from departmental archives in Lyon, offers a final haunting clue. It is a typed order dated August 12, 1945, from the Bureau of Military Engineering. The order directs demolition teams to render subterranean installations Vercors inert. Attached to the file is a photograph showing a cavernous chamber lined with concrete, large enough to house aircraft. The caption beneath reads simply, "Camp Vercors, Sector D, cleared July 1945. The image has never been released to the public. If Camp Vercors was truly destroyed, the question remains, why dynamite the evidence rather than preserve it? For study? The simplest explanation is that the site contained nothing extraordinary, only another subterranean stronghold among many. Yet the persistence of chaff notations, Soviet reports, and eyewitness testimony suggests otherwise. Something was removed from the mountain before demolition. Something that warranted silence enforced at the highest levels. The Alps are filled with ruins of war, but few inspire such unease as the vanished underground hangars of Camp Vercors. Whether they concealed advanced aircraft, experimental power systems, or merely the paranoia of a dying Reich, the truth was deliberately erased. The official story insists the resistance destroyed the camp in 1944. The archives, however, whisper a different tale. That deep in the French mountains, in the war's final year, the Reich built something that survived its fall, only to be buried not by time, but by deliberate silence. History ends in official dates and parades, but its darker chapters linger in locked drawers and broken testimonies. The truth was never lost. It was buried, handed off, disguised as progress, until no one dared to remember what had been done in the name of survival. The silence that followed was not forgetfulness, but design. And somewhere, in the gaps between war's ashes, those secrets still wait for their reckoning.